Maroon, I think it's important to first state this, is that we didn't initially call ourselves Maroons. So the name etymology it's got a number of meanings, one of which is maroon is a colour, a tone of brownish red. And I think when we were speaking in our your presentation, Match Fit, around the use of the term black and how accurate it is, all of the chiefs, not all of the chiefs, shout out to L.A. Lewis, speak specifically around maroon being a more accurate identifier of our actual tone, the brown and reds. Now, I don't necessarily agree or disagree, but it's just in terms of the term used. So maroon is a brown reddish tone. Now, I wouldn't argue in the same way that you did for black that we need to use that term extensively, because it's a self-identifier. So it's not a term that I'm kind of placing as we should all use it. It's just in terms of the etymology, there is a colour code to it. That maroon is actually a colour, as well as kind of the history of maroonage. So another term for the maroon, another definition of the term maroon is a runaway or fugitive. And that was a term that the British would have used for us when they first encountered us in 1655. However, the Spanish, who had colonised the island from the early 1500s, they've got a term which is probably more likely to be the origins of the term as Similon, which also means fugitive, runaway. Similon.
Maroon, which means runaway slaves who hide in forests.
Simaron.
So what were you saying earlier? The colour thing. Who's saying the brownish red is more what we are?
So some of the chiefs who don't like the term black, and I think it's usually around separating maroon heritage from the wider black diaspora. And in the same way that you spoke about the people having, I guess, ways to self-identify away from kind of the generalized terms. So I don't fully 100% agree with it, to be fair. I will still use the terms black, even though
it's like when they say the copper-coloured people, isn't it?
So I mean, it all depends on what we're comfortable with. So the term was used by the British and by the Spanish, and the term took on relevance for us as we fought for our freedom in the New World. So we did at some point adopt the terms, but actually for a longer part of our origin story, we were a Khan, we were a ASAFO, we were a Cromanti, we were Congolese. And I think what I will say at this point is that in a Kompong, we've got 3 very distinct burial sites. A Cromanti burial site. In modern terms, people will more know Cromanti as a Maroon language. And it's an admixture, a creolization of a number of different African dialects, Twi, Gar, and also kind of the surrounding.
The Maroons of Moortown in Portland are descendants of runaway enslaved Africans on the plantations of Jamaica. I, as a linguist, became interested in the community on reading a 1981 article by Kenneth Bilby entitled How the Older Heads Talk. The article suggested that in addition to regular Jamaican Creole, there were 2 other languages in use in the community. One language was Cromanti, clearly related to the Akan language cluster spoken in modern-day Ghana. This language was used by the Maroons to communicate with their African-born ancestors. The other language was Maroon spirit language, as Bilby called it, or as the people called it, old-time patois. That language they used to communicate with their Jamaican-born ancestors. My question was this for real?
Everything to Goni.
Yeah, you know, Sataka, everything. Chamu.
That term was often translated to us as talk some, leave some, which means that some things are better left unspoken.
Anyway, they like to see Wagwan. So when you know come up here, we don't miss nobody.
So initially, and I wasn't going to go too much into kind of the authored history. I was going to speak more to the oral traditions. So Maroons would have been, well, actually, let me not say that. The Jamaican Maroons, if you like, are widely known. But actually, there are stronger communities in the New World. So Suriname, for example, has a huge Maroon population. I think the consensus in 2012 had them.
So when you're saying Suriname, because my understanding of Maroons was just Jamaicans.
No, there's the Maroon communities all over the New World. Africa, there's a strong one in North Carolina. There is Brazilian population, over 800,000 people in Brazil self-identify as Maroons. The reason why I mentioned the Suriname Maroons is that sovereignty after independence in Jamaica. So we signed a treaty in 1738 that people will know of, and in 1739.
In Jamaica.
In Jamaica.
This is the beginning of the Maroon.
Well, this is no. It's not the beginning. It's not the beginning, because actually there was actually a man named Juan de Bolas, who was a Spanish freedom fighter who was first enslaved by the Spanish. Now, he developed some of the first Maroon communities in St. Thomas, but they weren't known. They weren't known as Maroons at that point. The term only became, I guess, a widely used term when we see the Akan and the ASAFO companies come in numbers to defend the Maroon communities. So Queen Nanani, the term, we use Nani now, but the term Na and Ni was the terms that would have been used in the community. So Na is the Ga term for king, and Na is the Twi term, the Ga term for queen, and Ni is the Ga term for king. So initially it should have been called Na Ni, and that kind of speaks to her leadership.
To some people, this shadowy character, Nani, popularly known as Nanny of the Maroons, was an Obeah woman with supernatural powers, which allowed her to stop bullets using her buttocks. There are also stories of how, after only a few days of planting them, her pumpkin seeds sprouted miraculously to feed her starving people. However, there is enough evidence of her contributions to the Maroon resistance in Jamaican history. What cannot be disputed about her is that she led a guerrilla warfare between 1724 and 1739 to defeat the British. Under her leadership, Maroon communities in Jamaica united and negotiated successfully with the British for land. This led to a treaty which was signed in 1739.
Matriarchy is extremely important in Maroon communities. We've got Nanani, and I'm going to speak a bit later around some of the strong female freedom fighters that we find across the New World.
Sorry, so Nani basically means she's like the queen king.
Queen king.
She's the
masculine,
queen king.
When we spoke last time, you was talking about the masculine and feminine energy.
Yeah, I mean, the way she would have inhabited or encompassed that term, she was a priestess of the Mayal tradition. So the Mayal is considered the first religion in Jamaica. So the Tainos would actually have practiced a form of Mayal, and the Arawaks would have also practiced a form of this. Now, when we came from West Africa, some of our practices, our ASAFO practices, our Ghani, our Kung Fu practices would have been syncretized into the population. So it is usually people think of Maroons as just an African presence, but actually the Tainos that were reportedly completely devastated. I think in 1509, the British consensus said there were 74 Tainos on the island. 74. And at this point, I think there's only 1,500 people on the island. But obviously, they hadn't charted the whole of the island. So, and I'll probably keep coming back to this throughout the presentation, where some of the records we have are from the British alone. So we have oral tradition, which is notoriously difficult to confirm with research. So some of the things I'll speak about are coming from the British records, and then comparatively looking at how our oral traditions either match up with, because actually Lord Trelawney, who was the general in St James and Trelawney at the time, he would have used the term Maroon. He would have also used, we probably wouldn't have used. I've gone into to Maroons, the term Maroons already. What I think is important to mention at this point is that after the treaty signed in 1738, there was two very distinct Maroon tribes: the Leeward, which I'm a part of, which is Flagstaff, which is the old Kodjo town, and Akompong. Now, the history of that specifically, that Flagstaff had around 4,000 inhabitants in the early 18th century. When the Second Maroon War started around 1760, around the flogging of a Maroon by some slaves, we set the old town on fire.
The slaves?
Yeah, so we was on a plantation raid and we was caught by slaves. And the slaves flogged us.
The Maroons were good at handling weapons, and they were brave in their endeavors. Even if they were retreating, they did so skillfully. The story begins in 1795, when two Maroons were accused of stealing 2 pigs. Both Maroons were found guilty and flogged. However, it should be noted that the Maroons were flogged by a slave. For the Maroons, this was an unimaginable event that should never have taken